Hello. Today I'd like to introduce the book Clash of Empires, written by Hong Ho Jung. The US and China have managed to maintain very close ties both politically and economically, but up until recent years, as US corporations and Chinese corporations have had a falling out, it is the belief and the main idea of this book that there will be continued rising tensions, even as far as maybe uh, military conflict between the two empires. First, the author gives us a bit of historical background. One is tempted to think that the aggressive stance that the US currently takes with China is a recent development. However, even as far back as the late 1980s and the early 1990s, the US government had already pegged China as a potential geopolitical threat to its hegemonic status. Even so, the US and China were able to create the Chimerica system and coexist, even profit off each other. This was because of intervention from the US big corporations. The US big corporations, multinational companies, were lobbied in Washington in order to give China the most favored nation status, as well as integrate it seamlessly with the world economy at large. Their reasons for doing this were very clear. US corporations wanted access into the massive Chinese market, and in order to do so, they applied pressure to their government. However, after they got into the Chinese market, the Chinese government had a turnaround and instead started protecting domestic companies at the expense of international ones. Especially after 2010, as the economy worsened, the Chinese government started to prioritize its domestic companies even more and take a much more aggressive stance toward international companies within its borders. After trying so hard to get into the Chinese market and being unable to reap the rewards, the US companies started to stop their lobbying efforts in Washington regarding their Chinese business efforts. Therefore, according to this book, the true reasons behind the rising tensions between China and the US, the new Cold War, if you will, do not lie in ideological differences between free market capitalism and state capitalism. Rather, the true difference lies in the fact that there are no big corporations that are lobbying for friendly Chinese relations. Back then and now, idealism, the differences between the ideologies existed. Rather, what's changed is the fact that the lobbyists have changed their mind regarding China. On top of this, there are international issues such as intellectual property theft and the fact that the Chinese aggressive expansion into the developing world. These reasons and these issues have made it abundantly clear for American companies that there is very little incentive to maintain friendly ties with the Chinese government. The new Cold War between China and the US has its essence here. There is no longer any clear economic incentives to maintain close ties, so therefore these two empires have lost the preventing force that kept outright conflict off the table. Furthermore, the book goes so far as to say that this relationship between America and China does not resemble the Cold War relationship between America and Russia, but rather the relationship in the early 20th century between the great established power that was the UK and the rising power that was Germany. In essence, the author makes the bold claim that rather than say a new Cold War, that it will be a hot war and that there will be massive conflict, military conflict between the two empires should things go south. And that is how he ends the book. This book, as I was reading it, gives just so much insight into the fact that just how much power multinational big corporations have on the geopolitical situation. America is a country run by lobbyists. This is a saying that I've heard many times up until now, but after reading this book, it makes just so much, it feels so much more real. Interestingly, the book, 100 years in the future by George Friedman also predicts a big World War III in the 21st century. However, this war is completely different in shape from the war that Hong Hung-jung foresees. The difference lies, it's very, very different in fact, because George Friedman actually predicts that China and the US will fight on the same side. If I had to compare these two analysts, George Friedman uses theories in international studies, international relations, as well as a fair bit of his own speculation. However, Hong Hung-peng looks deeply into the international actors, the actors such as multinational corporations that have a fair bit of influence on the geopolitical situation at large. If I had to choose between the two analysts, the one that sounds much more reasonable and at the same time much more convincing to me is the book that I read today, the book by Hong Hung-peng. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.